Well, I'm a chartered accountant, and I like to try and boil this all down to things which will add value. If I were the CEO of a sovereign wealth fund, I would be looking at all the different stakeholder groups, and I would be going, which ones are we most sensitive to in terms of our business model? That where it comes to the best employees, they're looking at the package of money and benefits, but they're also looking at who they're going to be working with. Will they enjoy working with them? Are they going to learn a lot? How is it going to help their career? Can they be proud when they're down the pub or in the golf course going, I work for so-and-so? Well, thank you. As you will see, I'm on crutches. So I'm a bit of a cripple. It actually happens that I broke my ankle playing golf about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So if any of you are thinking of sponsoring golf, beware. I could never have imagined that I would actually break my ankle walking around a golf course. But I went to the surgeon and said, this is ridiculous. And he said, well, yeah, you'd be amazed how many people do break their legs and arms and so on golf courses. So here I am. The only thing I could say, I suppose, is that I'm improving your diversity quotient, because not only am I disabled, but I'm also quite old. And I've been in this business of branding for like 40 years. I started as a chartered accountant with Price Waterhouse. I then moved into the management of advertising agencies for about 5 or 6 years, and moved from there into the branding world, where I worked as a consultant on brands for a while, and then got into brand valuation. And brand finance has been in business for nearly 30 years. We were set up in 1996. Our strapline is bridging the gap between marketing and finance. And what we, as the name implies, we try and help marketing people to obtain the funds they need to do the things that they believe they should be doing as brand creators and maintainers. And we frequently work the other way round, where we're trying to explain to financial audiences why they should care about this sort of stuff. And no doubt we'll just be talking about that in a moment. I'll give a few examples. So basically, we have been trying to bridge that gap for many, many years. Now, the thing I'd like to start with, and this is sort of self-defense in the asset management business, is that Warren Buffett, I don't know, he's said loads and loads of things over the years. The things that I remember are that he says he doesn't invest in businesses he doesn't understand, which has led him to lose out on a few high-tech things. He only invests in companies where he likes, trusts, and respects the management, which seems pretty sensible. But the third one, which always pleases people in my industry, is he says he only likes investing in companies where they've got very strong moats, as he calls them. Intellectual property moats that keep people out. And when he's talking about that, he is talking about patents and other types of IP. But in addition to that, he talks very strongly about brands. And I think it's well known that Warren Buffett has invested in many different brands over the years, Kraft. And in fact, one of the brands he invested in was Goldman Sachs. He put a lot of money in and did very well after the financial crisis. And so he is an advocate of branding. Now, it's taken us maybe 30 years to get this far. One might actually argue that the asset management business is at the far reaches of people who would be interested in branding. And it's my task in this 20 minutes or whatever it is before lunch to try and gee you up and stimulate you into believing that brands are not just rubbish that other people can worry about. They are very important. Now, we have been talking about doing a table on the valuation of intangible assets, of brands for the whole time that we have been brand finance. People keep saying to us, this is a very important area, you really should look at it. We finally got round to doing it. So this is the first instance, it's the inaugural league table of the most valuable and strongest brands in the asset management and sovereign wealth fund business. So as brand finance, we look to see, how is your brand performing? How can we help it to perform better and make more money for you? If we look at the brand analytics, can we see how we would improve its effectiveness? And we can talk about that in a minute. What direction should it be going in? Because brands have to have a very clear sense of direction. I think that's fairly self-evident, even in the asset management business. You can't chop and change around. And is it actually helpful in doing deals? Those are the sort of things that we spend our time doing. Now, one thing which has helped us in the last few years, we've actually been asked by a couple of different financial institutions to create indices that are used in financial products. The first one was for BNP Paribas, who created a structured product about 8 years ago, which was based on an insight into the value of the top European brands. And if you go and look at a company called Solactive, which creates the indices in Germany, they have got 3 or 4 now that are used by BNP Paribas to support a structured product. Now, that is not out there in the general market, but recently, in September, Legal and General Investment Management launched a second one, which is actually based on an ETF. It's not available in the States, it's only available in Europe. It's still early days. I think they've got about $20 million under management so far, but they're very enthusiastic about it and they're putting it out there. And that is based on the huge database that we have created of brand values. We do something like 5,000 brand valuations a year speculatively based on public information. We've picked out the ones that relate to Europe, and they have put that into an ETF. And you can see there that the performance, the back test was extremely successful. And since September, it's outperformed the S&P. So that's the sort of underlying bedrock to justify why I'm here talking to you. We've actually researched 75 brands in the category, but we've only produced 50 valuations in our report. We interviewed 4,000 people, 3,500 who were general knowledgeable people in the around this industry, and 500 who were direct peers working in the industry. In total, there are 77 trillion pounds worth of assets under management in both asset management and sovereign wealth. I think the number in sovereign wealth is about 12 trillion. And in total, the total values that we calculate in brands is about 70 billion. So it's not an inconsequential number even now, and even though it is not particularly taken that seriously by the industry. But in the survey we did amongst those 4,000 people, there was a fairly strong consensus that brands and reputation do make a very clear difference to investment decisions. And I think Warren Buffett proves that rule too. The starting point for any of this is, when you're looking at risk and reward, considering any investment, the starting point is expected risk and reward. A strong and established track record provides reassurance. Size makes a difference. So those are sort of fundamentals of the asset management business. Other questions that would be considered would be the organizational style. Is it top down? Is it rational? Is it a sensible decision-making strategy? The geographic diversity of what might be put in there. What can the partner bring to the table, assuming this is about partnership with another fund? So there are a number of fundamental considerations. The question is, does brand, and brand is about impression, it's about perception. Can those perceptions, if they have been influence people when they are thinking about those fundamentals? How do they feel about the professionalism and so on of the systems and staff? How do they feel about transparency, governance, ethics? Generally speaking, do they feel more favorable towards those things which help them make decisions that are favorable for the brand? I think the answer is yes. And I'll give you a few examples when we talk about it in a minute. So our research looked at 6 pillars. We laboriously strained ourselves to make it 6 Ps, so forgive me, all marketing people have got to have a little mnemonic like that. So we looked at presence. How well known are these brands and how familiar are people with them? If you were thinking of partnering with them, would you recommend them? What is the performance like, or the perceived performance? What is their purpose in terms of philosophy and investment strategy? How professional are they? And what are the people like? So all the sort of things that you might expect. And just cutting to the chase, the top performing, most valuable brands are these, dominated by the asset managers and dominated by American brands. Perhaps not surprisingly, they've been around longer, they've invested more, they are out there with the general public. Now, interestingly, I just looked a moment ago at BlackRock, which I hadn't looked at before. They are 358th in our global list of 5,000 brands. So they are a very significant brand worth $7 billion already. But interestingly, when I looked at the brand strength of BlackRock And we do what's called a brand strength assessment on every brand. It's a bit like a credit rating. We express it as a AAA rating like S&P. They are 38th strongest brand in our whole survey. So incredibly strong brands, even though the absolute value may be slightly lower. I think that's a reflection of the fact that although brands are important, they're probably slightly less important in this sector than some others, but they're still important. And those brands are very strong, and that makes them resilient, even when their performance goes down. So you can see here, very dominated by well-known American brands. If we look at the strongest brands, actually JP Morgan pips BlackRock, but again, there's quite a dominance of American brands. Interestingly, banking brands do particularly well. We haven't really explored exactly why that is, but what we think is that they are so heavily exposed with their marketing and performance in other contexts that there's a halo effect, so that they are considered to be very strong brands in this because they are well known in other areas, which I think is a sort of demonstration that if you're investing in a brand elsewhere, it's going to help you in this category. This is a sort of fairly simple chart to show the proportion of the value of brands that are arising in North America. North America is where all the brands in this category are, and largely it is driven by active and ETF strategies for the asset managers over there. You can see here that Europe is only about 10 or 11%. There, the performance is led by BNP Paribas. In the Middle East, it's relatively small, but it's growing because of the growth of sovereign wealth funds. So let's turn to which are the most valuable sovereign wealth funds. PIF is already the most valuable. And I heard earlier on that it has also significantly jumped its assets under management recently. So it is heading towards $1 trillion of assets under management. It has already got a brand which is worth $1.1 billion, according to Brand Finance. And then the other brands come along behind. It's not quite the strongest brand yet. It's number 2. But when you actually consider that ADIA has been around for 40 years plus, and PIF has been really active for only about 10 years, it's quite interesting to see what the momentum is. And I think looking at the sort of things that I've seen PIF doing in terms of brand quality of branding, they relaunched their brand about 6 months ago, very nicely designed, very nicely presented, put out there with sponsorship. They seem to be getting things right in the way that they are projecting their brand. And I think we would expect to see that grow quite significantly in terms of strength in coming years. So back to this again, I thought I'd just show you the results of some of the survey. You can see here on the left, this is talking about levels of A, awareness, and B, familiarity. Most of the asset management brands on the left there have almost 100% awareness, but very high levels of familiarity as well, which is helpful. It's the start point for what they call the marketing funnel. The thing which is most correlated to actual change in financial performance is consideration. So you go awareness, familiarity, then it's consideration. And so inevitably, if you raise these, you're going to be raising your consideration level. On the right, you see the several sovereign wealth funds, which don't do quite so well. They have pretty high levels of awareness, but their familiarity is slightly lower. So there's a gap there to be closed, I would suggest. But again, coming back to PIF, you can see that relative to its just basic awareness, familiarity is high, which suggests it's doing a good job of getting through to the audiences that are relevant. This is just a chart that shows what are the things that are driving some of this brand awareness. You can see here that social media, probably LinkedIn and similar types of social media, are the #1 thing for getting the message across. But you can see that industry publications and events like this one are extremely important. So, this is where a lot of the word of mouth recommendation and discussion happens. But then you can also see here that sponsorship, both event sponsorship and sports sponsorship, if you put them together, they come fourth, I think. So sponsorship is an extremely important thing. Now, one of the interesting things that we do at Brand Finance is we review whether or not sponsorships are appropriate to really push forward a brand, to say the right things about it, and so on. It's amazing how frequently it's a random decision by someone in the marketing department or the chairman's wife. If someone likes Glyndebourne, they sponsor Glyndebourne. Or if dare I say it, they like golf, they sponsor golf. Don't do that, whatever you do, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, sponsorship is a very important tool, but generally it is not scientifically thought about. And that is something which we are trying to change. So what this is talking about is consideration for partnership. And the light blue lines are the asset managers and the dark blue lines are the sovereign wealth funds. It shows that the willingness to partner or the desire to partner is lower among the sovereign wealth funds than the asset managers, perhaps not surprisingly from what I've said. So they are currently underperforming. However, if you look at people's perceptions of whether or not they're going places, whether they've got momentum, it's the other way around. The sovereign wealth funds are going places. And I think that will lead to a much higher level of propensity. What are the things that you would want to get? At the end of the day, what brands do is elicit economic responses from those perceptions. The economic responses are, I will do a deal with you there, and I won't do it with someone else. I will come and work for you, and you get the best people. I will put my money under your management. I will do a deal with you. Those are hard-nosed things which definitely are affected by having a high-quality brand. What this shows is the rank order of the drivers that we research, those 6 Ps that I talked about. You can see here that people actually, as a category, is the most important. Frequently, people say people are more important than brands, and I've seen that a lot in professional services with people like Price Waterhouse and the lawyers. They all go, it's nothing to do with PwC, it's nothing to do with those brands, it's all to do with me as a partner, it's nothing to do with them, it's me. The truth of the matter is they work together. Strong individual brands are very important, but they have a massively higher effect if they come from a well-established institutional brand. And I remember years ago, I spoke to the head of marketing at PwC, and we were talking about partners, and he was tearing his hair out, saying, it's terrible, like they don't get it about the PwC brand. And we were talking about the fact that at the time, a partner would charge £12,000 to £15,000 a day for their time. But when they left PwC and sort of set up on their own or went somewhere else, went to one of the secondary firms, they would struggle to charge more than £2,000 or £3,000 a day. And he said, don't they get it that that's to do with the PwC brand? And I think the same sort of thing is true where it comes to this. People are important, but the brand is also important. So you can see here that the top 6 categories represent 80% of the impact. Having an appealing investment strategy, in other words, having a clear proposition in brand terms, that would be a clear proposition. That's important. Performance is important, but people are very important. And you can see here that the people or the brands that are dominating in that are the banking brands, probably because they're better known. Brands drive incremental value, as I've said, and I'm nearly at the end, and then we can have a little chat. What this is showing is the proportion of brand value to assets under management, which it's all in decimal places, it's quite small, but it does come up to a big number in the end. And you can see here at the top end, it's actually a pretty high proportion, 0.4% of assets under management for the top performer, and the top performer in sovereign wealth fund brands is PIF, which has 0.15 of assets under management as its brand value, which is double the proportion of the other sovereign wealth funds. So just 4 final comments that I'll end, and then we can have a conversation about that. First, determine your brand positioning in line with the unique skills, sector knowledge, and stakeholder needs of your brand. When marketing people talk about, the stuff they talk about, they all go and talk about doing a proposition and a positioning. I think probably a lot of people in other sectors are a bit embarrassed to talk about that. But really what it says is, are we focused on what we're trying to achieve? And if we are, we can then put our money behind the marketing and the branding to make sure that they work well and everybody knows about it. So it's really just common sense. I'm not sure everyone does that. It's all a bit random walk theory. Secondly, people are the key driver, as I said, and therefore the trendy thing in marketing these days is what's known as employee value proposition work. Everyone in the brand industry is obsessed with employee brand propositions, employee value propositions, because you are using your staff as the means for your marketing to your market. If you evangelize them, they will make your brand more successful. I strongly advocate that. Thirdly, focus on your brand architecture. We have worked for many clients over the years where absolutely randomly they change their branding, they have sub-brands, it's all over the place. They dissipate their marketing budgets, they dissipate their message. If any of you are doing that, I strongly recommend you don't, or you think very carefully about sub-brands and how you position yourself. It is one of the, we make lots of money telling people the obvious. Get your complicated thing and make it simple. Thank you, that'll be a nice fat fee. I've just told you what you should have known to do in the first place. Fourthly, always measure and monitor your brand strength. And again, very self-interested, naked request for you to use brand finance. But what you have to understand is why your brand is strong, how strong it is compared with your direct competitors, and what is the implication for those economic measures that flow through and give you real value. This is not fluffy stuff. This is real asset creation. So with that, I think that's my last slide. If you want to get it, you can get this QR code. We've got a report that's online. I hope you have a look at it. If you've got any questions, let me know. And with that, I will go and sit down. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David, for that presentation. And I'm digesting all this information right now, especially for my interest, the sovereign wealth funds and seeing their branding. I remember when I founded the Transparency Index, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority was a one-page website with a phone number. And it looked like hasn't been updated in 10 years, but now it's a full-fledged site, and they're number one on your branding. And yeah, I think it's important actually that not just the asset managers and financial service providers work on their branding for generating business, but from a sovereign wealth fund standpoint, to tell the world that look, we're not here to take you over, we're here to be an honest partner and have that level of investment reciprocity. I guess, David, for you, as you talk to your sovereign wealth fund clients, why do you tell them branding is important for them? Like what's sort of the key reasons that drive those kinds of decisions?
Well, I'm a chartered accountant, and I like to try and boil this all down to things which will add value. And the only reason that I advocate all this stuff is for the same reason that Warren Buffett advocates it, which is that it adds value. There is no doubt that you will get higher share of mind and therefore higher share of market share, whether it's of available funds that people want to give you, deals that they might want to share with you, the amount you can charge for them. There are a whole variety of different measures. Let me just give you one very simple. You said give me a few examples. This is not in the asset management sector. It's in a different sector. Have you anyone heard of Cemex, which is a big Mexican cement and concrete company? We worked for them about 20 years ago when they had a very fragmented portfolio. They were called Cemex in Mexico, but they had another name in America whose name I've forgotten, in the East Coast. And then they had a variety of other brands across their network that nobody really knew. In Wall Street, their share price, their PE ratio, I think was about 10 or 11 times, but their European competitors like Heidelberg and Lafarge were up about 13 or 14. So there was significant PE ratio advantage, and it was quite illogical. And I remember I talking to their head of investor relations saying, why is that? And he said, well, a lot of the investors in New York think we're kind of some hick Mexican company that can't be relied on, even though the whole of their management was educated at Harvard. A lot of them were Americans, a lot of their business was in America, they were truly global, but they were suppressed because they were seen to be coming from the wrong place. They also had a very fragmented marketing stance because they had so many different brands. It was just a total mess. And we worked with a professor from Chicago Business School, and we basically rationalized their portfolio, became a proper global brand, and look at where it is now. I mean, I think arguably it's the biggest, most successful cement and concrete brand in the world. They are everywhere, and their financial performance is the same. He also actually said, this investor relations guy, he took us out for dinner in New York and said, this is on us because as a result of doing all of this, we decreased our borrowing rates by between 25 and 50 basis points because, again, they thought we were more credible. That is exactly down to strong branding.
That's a very good way. I mean, that's saving money right there. And kind of corollary, when we developed our transparency index, Mubadala was trying to, gain partners and raise debt themselves. And so they increased their transparency, follow those principles, and was able to, get debt at a much lower cost. But I want to jump to the asset management sector.
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of CEOs of asset management companies, given my role here at Swiffy. Both, the big ones, the State Streets and the Northern Trusts, all the way down to, a $100 million fund. And I think you're right, though. I think there isn't a lot of, you mentioned that the event sponsorships in sports. Can you dive into that? Like, what are some of the optimal strategies that you're seeing with some of these asset management firms? Because I know that, again, a lot of them post-COVID have pulled back on their marketing, and they focus more on their core business. But can you talk about how that could help them grow their AUM, grow their assets under management? I mean, like I said, when I consult with some of these smaller asset management firms, if I can't find your website on the first page of Google, I don't think you exist. Like, I don't know. So for me, I think even having like a web presence is actually really important. Can you give some examples on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the critical thing is when you look at any brand, it does not only direct itself to the end customer or consumer. It directs itself to all the different stakeholder groups. Now, if you look at a lot of the asset management firms, they are generally much more focused on a customer audience because they have a broader array of where they get their funds from. And that's probably one of the reasons why they're further ahead with doing branding. They have to think about customers and capturing their share of it. Where it comes to sovereign wealth funds, it's a bit different because obviously the money is coming from the sovereign entity and they don't necessarily have to promote themselves in quite the same way. There, the focus is on the other stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? Potential investees. I'm sure there are many instances where potential investees think twice about who they're going to allow to be an investor because they're thinking about what it represents and what it stands for. So, if I were the CEO of a sovereign wealth fund, I would be looking at all the different stakeholder groups and I would be going, which ones are we most sensitive to in terms of our business model? In particular, deals, but also, regulators, potential employees. What you've got to get is the best possible people. How do you go, well, if you want to be in the sovereign wealth fund management, you've got to come and work for me because I am the best brand. And, back to my point about employee value proposition, you need to really market your brand to those people to get the best people, then you will grow. So if I was a CEO, I'd be looking at the different stakeholders, working out what the effects I want, researching it, and then devising strategies. Quite often, it can be sponsorship as a strategy. One of our clients is TCS, the consulting firm, and they've got a very clever strategy around marathons. And I did see that one of the asset management firms, I've forgotten who now, is actually sponsoring the Boston Marathon. Marathons are a nice one because they're very community-oriented, they're very engaged. They say a lot of things about health, longevity of training and all that kind of thing. And TCS have jumped on that. They are now sponsoring 14 different marathons. Very single-minded. They haven't got a sort of scattergun of all the things that they're sponsoring, which you frequently find with less sophisticated companies. They sponsor like 10 things and you get confused. They are just going for that one, which is marathons. So focus would be one thing, research would be the other.
It's kind of like as you look at the PGA Tour, right, which in fact there's a connection with the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, but the marketing behind that and why large U.S. corporates sponsor that. And as you saw in your charts, the majority of those companies are in North America. Yeah. So all the European asset managers, financial service companies, take a look at that chart. But you also mentioned people, and I have a lot of friends some are unemployed, they left their company or they got laid off because of the consolidation. And as you know, the asset management business is a very competitive business because, some strategies are very similar, right? So can you explain, deep dive in more on, the branding and attracting people? I mean, I really want to dive more into that about how, having the best brand, you're able to get the best people versus something where they might not know, like, because you might be missing out on that part of the population, right?
I think it's true of every category that where it comes to the best employees, they're looking at the package of money and benefits, but they're also looking at who they're going to be working with. Will they enjoy working with them? Are they going to learn a lot? How is it going to help their career? Can they be proud when they're down the pub or, in the golf course going, I work for so-and-so? There are probably 5 or 6 different things. And to be honest, it's not rocket science. It's obvious. If you can walk in and say, I work for so-and-so, and everyone goes, oh, that's good. That's cool. You've hit the jackpot. There are some companies where people are very reluctant. And in fact, I'll give you another example. Do you remember a few years ago when Bob Diamond was in charge at Barclays, and there was quite a bit of scandal going around? I got invited by the head of marketing to go to Wimbledon on finals day, and it was an amazing game. And I'm sure he only invited me because all of their other really serious clients had said no, they wouldn't come because of the scandal. But I said, yes, I'll definitely come. So we go down to Wimbledon, we go to their reception suite. My wife and I sort of queue up, waiting for our lanyards, and the girl on the counter said, you don't have to wear the lanyard if you don't want to, Mr. Haigh. You're too embarrassed to walk around Wimbledon with a Barclays lanyard on. And I thought, oh my God, that's ridiculous. So I made a point of wearing it, saw the thing, and went to it. So being able to proudly talk about who you're with is critical. And I don't think, a lot of companies don't really think about it very much.
Yeah, especially when you're looking for a job and you see, oh, you worked at BlackRock or Blackstone. Oh, you're hired. Oh, you worked at a hedge fund. What's the name? I don't, they won't recognize the name of it. How are we on time? Just a last question. Okay. I guess now that you have all this data coming in from your surveys and research, what trends are you seeing in the next 5 years? If you were, there's a lot of asset management firms out here today, and public investors, what trends are you seeing?
Well, I think one of the trends in quite a lot of categories is growth in the stuff I'm talking about. Whether you like it or not, marketing, communications, and branding are going to increase. In terms of the actual underlying nature of the industry, there are various things that it seems to me are going to affect the industry, one of which is AI. AI dramatically increases all sorts of channels for communicating with customers. I think that the advertising industry are obsessed with the fact that they're all going to be put out of jobs and put out of business because AI is going to do what they do, which is clearly ridiculous because they're full of knowledge and experience and ideas, but they're paranoid about it. And most industries are now being transformed. I think technology is going to transform a lot of the things in the asset management industry too.
Who's going to write their copy, right? Their slogans and branding. Well, David, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.